Thank you, everybody, and good morning. I really appreciate you all coming on a Sunday morning after yesterday's late night partying. Berlin is such an amazing city. As Ulrike says, it has no respect for power and glamour and money. I think that's what a city should be for humanitarian surgeons. So I come from a planet called India, and my center, the Jamsetji Tata Center for Disaster Management, is an academic center. Though I've spent a big chunk of my life with the NGO world, the center is more of an academic center, and we look at disasters, we look at conflict from the academic perspective. So I'm going to give you an insight into what it is to be a person sitting at the other end, receiving humanitarian aid, and how it feels to receive humanitarian aid, and what has been my perspective of over the last 20 years, seeing a lot of teams come in and perform and help, and essentially it's the view from the south. So I practiced in Europe for a very short time before going back to India, and the way it worked was that I decided that I will go back and change the world like a young dog, and I'm going to do it by tomorrow. And I was in a hurry then, and I was more arrogant then, I must say, and I went straight out of my training in UK and went into this tribal hospital and set up shop. And everything was going fine until I think about a month later, I got a woman who was in obstructed labor. So she had a prolapsed hand, obstructed for a very long time. Baby was nearly dead, and I said that she needs surgery. We did her hemoglobin, and her hemoglobin was 2. And I said, one sec. In all my understanding of modern medicine, I cannot see a hemoglobin of 2 compatible with life. And obviously I said the technician didn't know his job, so I said, I will do it myself, and it was 2 again. And then that was a bit of a realization that this entire community that I was serving were either in a zone of epidemic malaria, or they had sickle cell disease or a sickle cell trait. So effectively, they had water running in their veins. And the problem of that is that if you start giving them blood all of a sudden, they go into failure because their heart has never handled so much of blood. And if you, of course, you can't operate on a patient with a hemoglobin of 2. Now, the thing about being a surgeon and being young, you have to do something. You can't just watch that happen. And so, obviously, you operate. And half an hour later, you have a dead child and a dead mother. And it's all very well because, when you see maternal mortality on statistics, it's all the same. It's all very concerning. But when you have a 22-year-old woman, completely fit, dead on your operation table, it suddenly changes a lot of perspectives on modern medicine. So, of course, modern medicine taught me that you should have a good antenatal clinic. So we went back, started an antenatal clinic, iron, folic acid, good instructions to the women who were in their pregnant phase. And everything went well until 2 months later, again, exactly the same thing. I said, I don't get this. She was in my antenatal clinic. I definitely saw her. How can she have a hemoglobin of 2 again? And again, I go through the same loop. And by now, I have killed 2 mothers and 2 children. And obviously, I was devastated. So after 4 months of wanting to change the world, I shut down my practice. I said, I don't think I'm doing any good. I'm just going around killing people. And I said, I'm going to shut down my clinic and go say sorry to the family that I could do nothing with all my English education and all my fancy universities that I went to. And so we took a bus, and it was a 4-hour ride by bus, and then we walked for 4 hours. So this was the time that the lady took to come to me, only to die in my clinic. And that's when I realized that that's the distance they had covered. And as I was entering the hut of this lady, and between the roof and the thatched roof, I could find all my tablets, all my iron and folic acid tablets out there. And I said, I don't get it. I don't get it. I mean, why has she come all the way there, picked up my tablets and thrown it, just to throw it away? Now, obviously, the first thing you would say is, these people deserve to die. I mean, they don't even understand what we in modern medicine are doing for them. And then obviously the health worker says to you, she is sorry, sir. She didn't mean it. I mean, she didn't mean it. She just died on me. And she didn't mean it. But then that's the way they are. They're so polite that you've come all the way to help us, but we're sorry, we just came and we couldn't live up to your expectations. And that's the kind of humility that they are showing for a person who's died. And you step into their hut, and obviously there's the father sitting there, and there are 4 different children of different sizes, and there are 5 plates, and of course the 6th plate would be the mother. And what I realize is that it's always the mother will eat last, because after the family has been fed and whatever is left behind, that's what the mother has. And after she's had what she's had, she gets the cheapest iron pill, which I get from a funding agency, which constipates her. So she hasn't eaten, and then she's constipated. Very quickly, she figures out that the black pill is the one which is constipating her, and she stops taking it because... And it took me 4 deaths to figure out that, oh, modern medicine is actually falling short because my patients are not actually having enough to eat. And if you don't have enough to eat, maybe the whole context changes. And I am not from London or Paris. I am from Mumbai. And I didn't know how my own country lives. And that was a hard lesson. Because just because you're from Mogadishu or Addis Ababa or any of these big cities, you're probably better trained to function in a lot of European cities more than in your own country. So that is a very hard learning for some people who are young and who want to change the world. I am going to be talking about my mistakes because typically I'm from Asia, and you cannot criticize people. We don't have no in our language. We can't say no. So if you've been there and you've worked with us, you'll have the head nod. You'll have maybe, you'll have anything but a no. And it's wonderful to work in Europe and Scandinavia where you get a no. So I'm going to be talking about my mistakes. You can extrapolate things. Second thing is, I've been told that there are a lot of young people around, so I have got to shift between talking about, and there is obviously a lot of very, very senior people from these organizations that I respect so much, MSF, Red Cross, Doctors for the World, and obviously there are some very, very senior people who obviously know these issues, but I'm going to try and revisit them. Okay, so I work also for the government of India, and I am not wearing my government hat today, but I will be giving you the government perspectives, but I'm today wearing my academic and my NGO hat. One thing is, India does not take aid. Humanitarian aid does not come to India, or at least they have a policy. So some of the stuff that I heard yesterday about sitting on the border, not getting visas to get into the country, all that is true for us. And hopefully through my talk, I might be able to tell you why some of these things are the way it is. And a lot of aid is being refused. For India, of course, it comes from the old Gandhian thought about, aid tends to cripple, you need to stand up on your own feet, and you need to do a bad job, but you still need to do it yourself. But that's, of course, not true for all countries. But there is a whole tendency to not take aid, and I would hope to explain some bit of it. But I have been handling volunteers for a long time, and there's a lot of people who want to come to India to work, and I would like to share my experiences of how it is to receive volunteers. And here is a humanitarian aid simulation, which is out of just about any earthquake. And this is the standard medical requirements, during a normal time. And this is MSF data. It's from a paper from MSF Sweden. And I've used this graph to show you what happens immediately after a sudden onset disaster. And there's a sudden surge of needs for surgery and a lot of non-trauma emergencies. And what you will notice is that the elective surgeries effectively stop and then only take off after nearly a week. Now, that's when the humanitarian aid workers come, and they're most welcome. And over the years, I've heard various reasons why they come. It's self-realization, bragging rights, self-actualization, guilt, be meaningful, want to give help, give back, do something important, assist those who are in need, alleviate pain, suffering. I belong to the diaspora. We need to recharge our batteries, monotony of regular practice, jobs, religious convictions, challenges, underserved, underprivileged, control, adventure, and see new places. Okay, and the list goes on, goes on. Okay, so obviously a lot of people come, and this is a graph from Haiti, again from the same paper, which shows that there is the number of hospital beds seems to rise as you go further off from the starting point at the epicenter of the earthquake. And we have more and more people coming in, and with that comes the media. Now, the thing about the media is, obviously, the media comes with the foreign teams. And for us who are at the South, you will notice that most of the work is actually done by the time the media and the foreign teams arrive. So there's a spike of trauma and all sorts of cases which gets tackled by the time the media comes. And once the media comes, all the focus shifts on the foreign medical teams. And believe me, there are very few people left out there, because you couldn't be living for 5 days without, you can live 5 days without medical care, but you will not live 5 days without food and water, and there is nothing there. So typically what happens is everybody starts moving out, and all the teams are coming into the epicenter, and it's already 5 days after the earthquake. And then you have very few patients there, but the media is following everybody else around, and it's a circus. And what happens is the entire work that has been done by people who are there, who are local, somehow never figures, and it's all the attention shifts to the foreign medical teams, which is, I mean, that's the way it is. It's just that it's very disheartening for my teams who've really put in all that effort and really have very little space for the acknowledgement. So this is the way it goes, superimposing the two graphs, that all the work gets done, and then there is this whole surge of hospital beds which come in. And of course, very quickly, I have them leave. And again, when they leave, it's usually they're very busy, important practitioners. There is a problem of infectious disease. There's no health insurance, security, communication, language, culture, food, heat. Inadequate infrastructure, I do only breast surgery, it's too expensive, it's politically unsafe, personal problems, personal hardships, climate, food, language. But wasn't all this there before you came in? It was exactly the same when you came in. And so when I get to hear these things about the South, and I say, well, that's fine, but that's how it's going to be even after you leave. And I mean, you've come in with this, and when you're leaving, it's pretty much going to be the same. So what happens after everybody leaves? So again, these are the things which we end up having. There's a lot of expired medicines, a lot of out-of-date equipment. There are lots of neckties, and some of them I still use now. Lots of old clothes. What is it about old clothes? I don't get it, because my problem of old clothes is, like, in 20 years ago, when we used to receive old clothes, we knew exactly what to do. There was no fuel, so we would light the fires and cook. And we would use the clothes to cook because they were really, it was a smoky affair, but still you had fuel out there. And now all the clever countries have come up with these fire-resistant stuff, fire. So the only use of old clothes is now it's completely wasted. So the other thing about old clothes, again, the view from the south, old clothes, people who are in conflict or people who have had disasters are not beggars, really. They are people like you and me who have had a misfortune, and giving old clothes is at one point dehumanizing them. It's why not new clothes? Oh, that's my point. And why should you give me expired medicines, which I have to go through piles of expired medicines? Why not medicines which are not out of date? And of course, I see all these million-dollar missions which are coming in and going out, and I really wonder whether it's the appropriate thing to do. I will just comment on it in the last few slides. So, what happens after everybody leaves? And this is my favorite quote, which is, "Nothing spoils the good results of a surgery as quickly as a follow-up." So if you never went back to see what you did, you are the world's greatest surgeon. And unfortunately, I went back and looked at my own results, and I had this lady give me offer tea. This is the only picture I have. Just to take it aside, I have a problem about showing pictures from humanitarian missions because a lot of it is driven by showing pictures of misery, and I think there's a whole ethical issue about using of pictures to project this. I know it's a great way to raise funding and aid, but I have a problem. I have a personal problem with the whole ethics of that. This lady has allowed me to use a picture. She's got this lovely attire. And she told me that 2 years ago you operated on my wrist, which I had broken, and you forgot about my arm. So I have an arm which moves around, and obviously the bone had not joined. And she was very forgiving, and it was very humbling that she was willing to forgive me because I would have lost my medical license and definitely been sued in my place of work. But am I allowed to do this is my question. And then we looked at all the other places, other data coming in from everywhere else, and this was the MSF data from post-Haiti. And you can see that the requirement for specialized surgery is actually quite low, and you have a lot of simple things that need to be done. And there were a lot of people in the audience who said that, oh, it's okay for you because you're a surgeon and you can go to a disaster area and become useful immediately. And I think that's the big danger, that if you're going to become useful very immediately, you can also be very harmful very immediately. So maybe just because you're not a surgeon doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to do good, because most of the rest of the stuff, you don't need specialized surgeons. This is what we found at the end of surgeries, and ORIF is open reduction internal fixation, which is the most advanced technique in orthopedics. We've learned it. We all came to Germany at one point of time to learn this very, very advanced technique. And what happens with that is you have a broken bone and you fix it and you put a plate across it and put screws, and all is well because the patient is able to walk the next day. And of course, that was a transition from the time that you had a lot of pulleys and a lot of traction being put. Now, the thing is that that's all what modern surgeons know how to do. And typically, if you have an earthquake in any rural part of the world and you're bleeding to death, you normally take cow dung or you take mud or something to that effect, and you pack your wound with that. Seems like a dumb thing to do. Why don't you just call an ambulance? But that's how they live to come to the hospital. And it's all right because you have an infected wound, but you've made it to the hospital. Now, the thing is that if you had an infected wound, the whole dynamics of the treatment protocol changes. And typically, if you had a fracture which broke the lower part of your leg and you shoved a lot of cow dung on it to stop the bleeding and stop it from hurting, you would have a modern surgeon come in, open the thing out, and drive a nail, hammering it all the way up to the knee. And so after this wonderful surgery gets done, 2 weeks later, instead of, I pull out all the metal work, throw it away, and where I would have been amputating below the knee, I amputate at the knee, because all that cow dung has been now pushed all the way up to the knee. And this is not anybody's fault, because it's just not a part of what you learn in today's medical world, because you don't see these cases. So a lot of relearning needs to be done, and I feel that a lot of modern medicine is shifted so much towards specialized surgery that that part of the world where there are other types of surgeries which need to be performed don't get looked at. The other point is that the giver and the recipient are both blessed. Now, this is one strong message that I've just heard this, you teach a man to fish, and you know the rest. So the thing is that there's a lot of this thing happening one way, and I would say that there are lots of things that you can learn back and forth. And one of them is like, how many of you are going to be able to perform a cesarean section without electricity? And that's routine life for us. Now, the thing is that if we are not able to learn from each other, then it's always a one-way thing. And after a while, people from the South, because again, they cannot say no, and they're too polite, and you're the guest, and they will not tell you anything. But essentially, you don't move ahead. So I think there's this whole requirement to go back and forth, and basically we are having to do neurosurgery without CT scan machines, and you would, typical Colles fracture, you would reduce with one single plate of an X-ray. So you would have to be able to take an X-ray before reducing a wrist fracture, or one plate after reducing the wrist fracture. And this was after in Europe, where we had a C-arm to reduce fractures. Most of the surgeries still cost around $10. And so whether you get a cesarean section done or neurosurgery, or you get your chest opened, it would cost $10. And now, just to give you a perspective, that $10 does not seem like a lot of money, but still, when you're earning less than $1 a day, $10 at one time is a lot of money. And they usually pay, it's not always in cash, but it's sometimes in kind. And I must say, it's great to get paid in bananas. And the first time you get paid in bananas, you write to all your friends working in cities, MasterCards don't work here, but we get paid in bananas. So I had a whole bullock cart full of bananas being dumped in my clinic, and I was thrilled, taking pictures and sending it back, and never do it, because what a young surgeon does not know that all those bananas, all those dozens and dozens of bananas will all ripen on the same day. So you're waiting for this big day, and suddenly they're all ripe. So we don't have dermatomes, but you use razor blades, and you modify razor blades to do your skin grafting. You use mosquito nets as hernia meshes. You have a lot of anesthesia deaths. That's a big hole out there, and there's a whole lot of physician-nurse migration from the South, as we know. And that leaves you with very few people to work with. But the moment you start propagating low-cost surgery, suddenly nobody wants to listen to you. They don't want to they don't want to publish your articles, because obviously it's not pharma-driven. It's not driven by, so if you say mosquito net and hernia meshes, and obviously you're doing it at 1,000 the cost, and probably equally good, but not everybody's impressed with that. Then this is an analysis of how much it costs to do surgeries. So whenever you have a visiting team, it costs it twice or thrice or 4 times more. And what we found is if you were repairing cleft lip, cleft palate, and you had people doing it locally, it was 10 times cheaper. The thing is that there is a need to build capacity, and there is an issue about only sending missions in to do the job and then going back. Moving on to data, and what happens with, what are the priorities for us in the developing world? And this is sort of a systemic analysis that I did for all the work that is being done in the developing countries as far as data-driven research goes in disasters. And this is the disaster world. 90% of the disasters happening in the developing world, and 10% happening in the developed world. And if you do a PubMed disasters, you do a search on disasters, and you have 63,196 articles, and you refine that search with developing countries, and you're down to 438 articles. So less than 1% of all articles in scientific literature is about the developing world. And once you refine it for developing world authors, and then you're down to 82. So my point here is that there is no voice from the developing world. We have all the disasters, but if you look at what is there in published literature, and that's what it looks like in published literature, that you have all the data, even about developing countries, coming from mainly from the developed world. And if you divide this in terms of levels of evidence, and of course you can't do randomized controlled trials in the disaster setting, that's not possible. So we can at most target level 3 or level 2 articles as good articles, and of course level 5 are the case reports, expert opinions, and all the reports written by missions which are going back to their countries. And then you will see that the vast bulk of evidence that we have in disasters is that 97% of the articles are all about, I went to Malawi and I came back and I saw this. And there is, that's of course level 5 research. Then 30% were commentaries, and that was the basic distribution of the level 5 and level 4. And as you move up the levels, you'll find that there are very few articles which are really capturing what happens in the long term, the whole phase. That's the acute phase, the rehabilitation phase, and the recovery phase. That's not been captured. And for that, you definitely need local teams who are staying there. And most of these level 2 and level 3 articles were done by local teams who stayed there and followed up these patients. So the publishing silence on developing world is probably poor funding. Research is not a priority because you have to first serve and do your work, and then you do research. English is a barrier. Poor methodology, and we have a lot of rejections for that, and probably it's a part of the overall publication bias that we would have. But all policy, all advocacy is based on published literature. And if you don't have a voice in published literature, then you don't make it, and then you have a lot of policy being decided by what is existing currently in the publishing world. So we need to move this research agenda for the developing nations, and obviously we need more local research, and the focus has to move to prevention, mitigation, preparedness, rather than the acute phase of disasters. Now, acute phase of disaster is very exciting, a high adrenaline event, things are happening. And believe me, 2 months later, everybody's forgotten it, and you've moved on to the next big disaster. And the guys who stay behind, they are the ones who realize that there is so much work to be done, and the long-term recovery studies and standardizing definitions, research methodology, all that is what is required in the long run. So here's an appeal. Basically, all those millions of dollars of acute humanitarian aid, which is pushed in during the acute phase, needs to be pushed a little further down. And if that is possible, then I think we are going to be making more progress, and I think we learn very slowly in the disaster world. In the disaster world, I think it's now becoming a science, disaster medicine, but I have been seeing over the last 2 decades, we've been learning very, very slowly, and that's just because we are not seeing the other phases of the disaster. This is, again, not me. Somebody else said it, but I would agree with quite a few things that they said. The 7 sins, this is from the World Journal of Surgery, leaving a mess behind, failing to match technology to local needs and abilities, failing of NGOs to cooperate and help with each other. We've heard all of this before. And accepting help from military, again, this is controversial. Failing to have a follow-up plan, allowing politics, training, and other distracting goals to trump service, and going where we are not needed, and doing the right thing for the wrong reason. So this is perhaps summing up what I had to say. How much time do you have? Okay. So I'm done with my talk. I just thought I'll give... Thank you.
So thank you very much for a wonderful talk. Since we're running a little short on time, we'll save the questions for the next session. So if the audience has any questions, think of them now and post them in about 5 to 10 minutes. There's 3 other sessions happening right now. So in here, we have the keynote debate. We have 2 more experts joining us here discussing the topics we just touched upon. And in room A, B, and C, we have Haiti, Where's the Money? Mother and Child Maternal Health in room B, and Big Data in room C.